Over the past year, much of the world's attention has focused on the war in Ukraine and rising tensions between the United States and China. However, the outbreak of fighting in Sudan from mid-April until now also makes global leaders consider whether it is starting a new wave of violence in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. Since fighting broke out between the Sudanese army and a notorious paramilitary group, nearly 1 million people have been forced to flee their homes, thousands have been killed, and thousands more injured. Fierce street battles, explosions, and aerial bombardments are ravaging the capital, Khartoum, as two factions try to control the northeastern African nation of 45 million people. In Darfur, local tribal militia have entered the fray, raising concerns about the spread of violence. The ceasefire between two factions is frequently violated. So what is the root cause of this problem? Where will Sudan's future go? How does the war affect global security? Let's follow our program right now. The cause of crisis in Sudan is similar to many recent wars. People were attempting to break free from a decade-long dictatorship. This effort affected the civilian population and was vulnerable to foreign interference. The conflict in Sudan today has elements from many sides, such as Egypt, Syria, Iran, Turkey, UAE, the United States, China, and Russia. Regional powers jostle for influence as the future of the global order is at stake. Foreigners have contributed to the transition to democracy in Sudan following the overthrow of dictator Omar al-Bashir in 2019. Some may now have joined in the war. Currently, the Sudanese Armed Forces (SAF), led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Force (RSF), commanded by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, are attacking every day to approach a bloody and protracted war, even threatening to extend beyond the country's borders. In retrospect, in the years following the end of the Cold War, the prospect of the global confrontation seemed less bleak. The number of global conflicts declined throughout the 1990s, so did the number of people killed in conflict each year, except in 1994 when the Rwanda genocide occurred. Then came the 11th September terrorist attack and the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan, then Iraq. These two interventions set the stage for what was to come when America's credibility was eroded. In addition, the war in Iraq upset the balance of the power in the region between Iraq and the Gulf monarchies and paved the way for the rise of jihadists and eventually the emergence of the Islamic State (IS). Since 2010, the number of conflict and death in global conflict has increased again. Wars in Libya, Syria, and Yemen, and new conflicts in Africa have largely been shaped by the influence of the Middle East. New and old wars in Africa, inspired by Islamist militants, including IS. The West's counter-terrorism operations have also created many other grudges. Excluding Ukraine, the latest conflicts to take place are between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Ethiopia's Tigray province, and Myanmar. Current conflict takes 3 times more lives each year than 2 decades ago. Conflicts in Libya, Myanmar, Syria, Yemen, and to some extent Ethiopia stem from mass street movements aimed at opposing the authoritarian governments amid socio-economic difficulties. These struggles follow a repetition pattern. The people expect change, the government seeks to protect its interests, the military also want to share benefits. Unresolved ethnic, religious, or racial tensions also fuel division, lead to war. The story of Sudan is as familiar as above. After the nationwide uprising to overthrow dictator Bashir, Sudan became a victim of the legacies left by the dictatorship. General Dagalo or Hemedti is a warlord from Darfur who since 2003 has supported President Bashir's crackdown against rebels in the region. In 2013, President Bashir brought together the Janjaweed militias under General Hemedti and renamed them the Rapid Support Force (RSF), empowering this unit as a parallel force to the army and used to suppress uprisings in the West. The current leader of the Sudanese Army (SAF), General Burhan, a professional officer who joined Hemeti in campaign in Darfur, has an aversion to the civilian regime, thus hindering the transition to democracy in Sudan. The RSF and SAF briefly agreed to oust President Bashir, then expelled civilian leaders with whom they pledged to share power. Finally, Hemeti and Burhan were at odds with each other. General Hemeti refused to put his paramilitary forces under the command of the SAF, so the power struggle deepened. Ultimately, Sudan's democratic transition stalled, as both Burhan and Hemeti were determined not to give up power, risking losing control of vital resources or facing public calls for previous crimes. Sudan has a traumatic history. In the past, the people of this country have suffered many atrocities, but this time the prolonged urban war is unprecedented. Street fighting in Khartoum escalated suddenly, leaving people unprepared. Millions of residents are trapped in the fire in their homes and struggle to find food, water, and other necessities. Hemeti sent tens of thousands of warriors from different regions into the capital. They sheltered with civilians, looting to survive when supply lines were cut off. For the official army, shelling of populated areas became increasingly indiscriminate. They care more about protecting power than protecting people's lives. In general, the Sudanese army is like a mess, no different from the RSF force. Almost all conflicts over the years have had foreign elements. Looking back at history, outside interference in wars is normal, but today not only the great powers, more and more middle powers are participating in the yoking for influence. This contributed to the bloody wars of the past decade. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States had no rival and the world became unipolar. This period saw fierce wars in Somalia, Yugoslavia, the Rwandan genocide, the brutal conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Afghanistan War, the Iraq War, and even earlier wars in Sudan. It all happened at a time when America was dominant globally. In some cases, these wars were waged by the United States. Nevertheless, the emergence of a strong and confident West, along with its growing network of allies, also plays a more active role in the structure of international relations. At a time when the unipolar world was just to be over, many governments around the world no longer saw the United States as the sole superpower and recalculated relations to suit their interests. The regional powers are gradually wanting to assert themselves and are ready to participate in the competition for influence. Many countries find it necessary to build up processes in weaker countries to protect their interests or to prevent rivals from doing the same. This effort is often counterproductive and disruptive, as the United States has done before. In the Middle East, for example, the past fierce competition for influence was between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The second competition was Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates (UAE), and Egypt against Qatar and Turkey. For years, these rivalries have impeded democratic transitions and caused conflicts in many countries, such as Yemen, Lebanon, and Syria. Some of the fights are more complicated, like in Syria and Libya, where Russia and Turkey each support one side. Increased outside involvement complicates efforts to end the war. So is the situation in Sudan. A number of outside countries are involved. Both General Hemeti and Burhan have ties to Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates (UAE) support Sudan's security forces after the fall of President Bashir. General Hemeti's paramilitary units have fought alongside many Gulf states in Yemen. This brought General Hemeti wealth and power. He also had ties in Chad, the Central African Republic, and throughout the Sahel region. He is also affiliated with the Russian paramilitary group Wagner and General Khalifa Haftar in Libya. On the other side, General Burhan is supported by neighboring Egypt. Western powers also play a role in unfolding tragedy. Social activists in Sudan accuse Washington of choosing their favorite people to form a civilian government, ignoring previous former military leaders, leaving the conflict unresolvable. The West also missed the opportunity to support the civilian government, taking them too long to receive aid after the 2019 revolution. The US was also too slow to remove Sudan from the list of countries sponsoring terrorism, a step that could empower civic leaders. Another party indirectly involved in the Sudan conflict is China. Intentional infrastructure loans and investments into the African country have created a debt trap, making it increasingly difficult to manage the budget. This is also the reason why the factions are more conflicted and try to exploit more natural resources. The Sudan crisis, like other recent conflicts, has many elements of a protracted war. Today's wars last on average twice as long as 20 years ago and 4 times longer than during the Cold War, according to the International Relief Committee. For example, there is no end to the conflicts in the Sahel, where fighting between Muslims, rival militias, and national security forces is causing tragedy in large rural areas. Another example is Myanmar, still in a crisis caused by the 2021 coup. Even where the bloodshed has eased recently, such as Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, the signal of long peace has yet to come. The question is, will Sudan be the same? Today's conflicts are often protracted in part because they tend to be more complex than in the past, involving not only more foreign elements but more parties joining the war. Local warlords can now easily tap into the global criminal network and marketplace to sustain resources for the war. In many war zones, jihadists play a major role. It is alarming that this situation could happen in Sudan. For now, the confrontation is between SAF and the RSF, but others could also be drawn in. Other militias so far have stayed out of the conflict and refused to choose sides, but they have been mobilized to stand ready to defend themselves. The longer the war drags on, the greater risk that fighters with links to Al-Qaeda and IS will join. Al-Qaeda and IS are wielding influence over several other battlefields in Africa. The SAF and RSF seem determined to fight until one side gains a decisive advantage, paving the way for negotiation in which the victory makes terms. In neighboring Ethiopia, the war in Tigray ended because Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's forces prevailed on the battlefield and the Tigray militants were forced to accept a settlement based on terms of winning party. But Sudan is not Ethiopia. After decades of dictatorship by Bashir, General Burhan's national army was outnumbered but weak and divided. RSF is less but more skilled and also more aggressive. Decisive victory for one side seems unlikely. If the war drags on in Sudan, the consequences are bound to be dire. Even before this conflict, about a third of Sudan's people, or more than 50 million people, depended on aid. Poverty would make it easier for Sudanese to join one of the two fighting factions. More than anything, they first need food to put on their stomachs. If the crisis is more severe, instability could spread to neighboring countries, which are ill-equipped for a mass exodus of Sudanese people. Furthermore, the strategic location of the Sudanese coast along one of the world's most important waterways, with 10% of global trade passing through the Red Sea each year, means the Sudan's conflict will have even more serious consequences for the world. Still, there is some hope in the crisis. Recently, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have re-established diplomatic relations with Iran after years of hostility. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are becoming more involved in the peacemaking process in Sudan. Acting as mediators, Saudi Arabia is located across the Red Sea from Sudan. If the neighboring country does not deal with the riots, they are also at great risk. The situation is similar to Egypt. Currently, Saudi Arabia has just promoted diplomatic activities to connect the two sides together, and on the other hand, sought to negotiate not to let Egypt and any other foreign country provide military support to one of the two fighting sides. Other neighboring countries of Sudan, such as Ethiopia and Eritrea, are also concerned about the situation. If there are peaceful moves, there is a good chance they will hold. Currently, fighting to the end is still a priority decision for both sides. General Burhan and Hemeti both wanted to obliterate the other's forces. That is why some argue that, even if there is a ceasefire, fighting will continue regarding unresolved disputes. The Saudi Arabia brokered negotiations in mid-May, while not resolving the cause of the conflict, did help the two sides sit down and talk to each other. According to experts, stakeholders need to continue to support Saudi Arabia. The African Union needs to be more involved to create a common voice despite the ceasefire being repeatedly violated. In addition, the United States and the West must also participate. For example, punish any country that sends weapons to Sudan. Currently, only the United States can do this. This is a very important condition for ending the fight. However, the United States is also afraid that if it does, other countries will demand the same with Ukraine, which is to stop pumping weapons into the conflict. Many experts affirmed that the world should be concerned about the situation in Sudan. The reason is its ripple effect, which can cause another global socio-economic crisis even more serious than the conflict in Ukraine. Our program has come to an end now. Thank you for your attention and see you next time.